being a 90s kid, and of course thinking that the 90s was the best decade, there are definitely a lot of references in that 90s show that I enjoyed. But as an episode and the specifics of the narrative, I didn't really love it. This is the 11th episode of the 19th season of The Simpsons, and it seems like I'm not alone. This has 6.3 out of 10 on IMDb, which for The Simpsons, even for this stage in The Simpsons, is a pretty low rating. So it just seems that it's not been well received at all. But as I said, there are quite a lot of references to the 90s, a lot of, very witty humour, and then occasionally some dry humour and dry wit even, and that I liked. But the actual narrative I didn't like. But what I will say is that actually a couple of episodes ago I had a thought. I don't know if I voiced this thought, I can't remember. But I wondered how old Marge and Homer were, because traditionally Marge had to give up her dreams because she got pregnant with Bart right after high school, and Homer's around the same age. But at the same time, Bart's only 10 and they're nearing 40. And this episode actually addressed that. Lisa said, and I quote, "Mom and Dad are almost 40 and Bart is 10. And the episode basically made it very clear that viewers are aware that Bart was born when Marge and Homer were very young, and Marge never had a chance for her career to go anywhere. But in this episode, they went, let's forget that. Let's ignore that history and pretend that actually Marge went to college, which is fine. I don't mind it. I don't consider this episode to be canon. I am removing the events of this episode from my mind, or at least from the Simpsons timeline in my mind. So it's definitely one where I feel like they just went, we're going to acknowledge what you know and change it. Because actually there are episodes where they kind of mention the age of The Simpsons or allude to certain things, but never actually say, hey, this isn't possible because of when Bart was born. So I like the fact that they addressed it. The Simpsons is very good at that. It's very good at going, hey, we know this is a plot hole, or we know this is a continuity issue, and by making you aware of it, we're holding our hands up and you can't point it out. So I like that. I really appreciate that. So that's all good and well. But the actual narrative I didn't care for. Marge goes to university, fantastic, no problems with that. But she has this professor who, well, he convinces her that Homer isn't good for her. Homer is in a band, which is fine. We're not exactly talking the Barbershop Quartet or anything, which is a band I do love. But it was okay. And honestly, nothing really happens. It's not that interesting. But as I said, there are a lot of references to things in the 90s, or remarks the characters made about things that would happen in the future. Things that we know now with hindsight, which I thought was, not too bad, quite well written. So, line by line, it's okay, but the overall narrative, I didn't care for it. I didn't like it. It wasn't really very interesting. There is nothing that I wrote down. Actually, that is a lie. There is one thing that I thought was beautiful and really poetic. And Marge holds this Beanie Baby. Loved it. I was a big collector of TY beanies. And it's an octopus called Cutie Puss. And, well, I won't say exactly what happens, but the tentacle gets ripped off and all of the beans spill out of the octopus. And it was kind of a metaphor for what was actually happening in that scene, which I thought was quite nice, but at the same time it was just a way to inject some more of the 90s in there. So yeah, if you like the 90s, whether you grew up in the 90s or you have fond memories of the 90s, I think you'll enjoy bits of it. But the narrative itself, I personally do not consider to be canon. I can't imagine they'll ever mention this episode again or reflect back on it. If they ever have to tell the story of Marge being pregnant again, I imagine it will kind of go back to her being much younger. I could be wrong, because there are 14, 15 seasons, 16, I'm not entirely sure, after this. And I could be wrong, it could have happened already. But either way, for me personally, that 90s show had its good moments, but it's not a good narrative. I wouldn't mind watching it again as a 90s fan, but I don't consider it to be Simpsons canon. It's not the worst, it's definitely not the best.